You're looking remarkably spry, Patrick Johnston, with 81 games to go. Happy season opening week. Welcome to Canucks This Week to all our viewers and listeners. Quick reminder, thepromise.com, vancouversun.com. Sign up for our Canucks Report newsletter. You'll get all this content sent to you every day, regardless of format. Now the games are underway. That was quite an opener, wasn't
it? Well, to pump Ed Willis's book, never boring.
It certainly isn't. So we'll still speak pretty generally about the season today, but specifically about that game.
Right.
One-off, or are there alarm bells ringing for you?
I mean, I appreciated Rick Tockett's effort at spin on it. The day after the sun came up, it wasn't that bad. I mean, he wasn't wrong. The Canucks did dominate the first period. They generated lots of stuff.
60 minutes, Patrick. Got to play 60 minutes.
They didn't actually give up
or something.
Yeah, they didn't actually. Yeah, exactly. They didn't actually give up that many. The problem was they stopped skating, so they stopped creating chances and stopped dominating the game. And I'm not going to say it was the goalie's fault, but they didn't get any saves.
Yeah.
And this story would be a different story. We'd be saying, oh yeah, that was a nice, tidy season opening win, some issues to take care of, but it was only the Calgary Flames. Well, it was only the Calgary Flames, and they still lost. So you sit there and wonder, say Friday night, we're recording this Friday morning. Friday night, you're playing the Philadelphia Flyers, who at the very least are relentless because of their coach, and also I think they have some talent. I don't know if they're that great a team, but they are a hardworking team. You start looking at the list, this road trip, they're going to Florida. They're going to play, well, in theory, they're playing Tampa. They're playing the Panthers, right? They're going to play some tough teams next week. And they're just, you cannot let things lie around the way the Canucks did against the Flames. And you certainly need to get some saves.
It just made me laugh. Hockey cliches when you said they stopped skating, because it reminds me of Canuck draft pick Dan Woodley, who, of course, was... he was a top 10 pick, seventh overall, played 5 NHL games, scored 2 with the Canucks. And he did score 2 goals in 5 games, which isn't terrible, I suppose, but he never got back to the NHL. And I remember in hindsight, them saying, well, he couldn't skate.
Yeah.
Drafted guy 7th overall, who you, in hindsight, said couldn't skate. So anyway, enough about Canucks.
Stop working hard. It's, it's the cliche, but the point is that they
didn't move their feet.
Yeah, they were supposed to be doing what they had been doing well in the first period, and they were controlling the play. And the part of it is Tocchet admitted. Listen, I've talked a lot about he really wanted to improve their their rush game, their transition game, as coaches like to call it, and they were doing a pretty good of that. But good job of that in the first period. But what that does is it leaves you, on edge defensively, and you got to really dial in on making right decisions when you are in that kind of position, because you're a little more vulnerable, and the Canucks did not make very good decisions.
One of the great quotes, and this is why I love Tocchet, there's a lot of coaches, I think in particular newer coaches, who don't really say anything, and Tocchet still has that more, the old school where he'll be a little more honest. And for him to say, we probably worked, we did so much in transition and training camp, we didn't work enough on defense. When you look at some of the new pieces they've added,
right.
Isn't that important that there's a bit of a feeling out process? Because obviously offensively you can be more creative, defensively you're more rigid, and you have to be attuned to the system. So is that part of it? Is this team still learning to integrate their new pieces?
I think that's some of it, sure. I mean, everyone loves talking about preseason and how short the schedule is, and I think people forget,
enough
teams take forever to come together. I mean, you don't just flip the switch and all of a sudden everything's aligned, And I think you're exactly right. I think this is a case of a team that has a bunch of guys who are familiar with what they're supposed to be doing, and then a number of new players. And you look at that third pairing, the Forbort-Desharnais pairing, which was terrible on Wednesday. And I don't want to say I told you so, because I want to give these guys a chance. But there's 2 new defensemen playing in a very demanding system. Obviously have both played for high-end teams, so they can, they should be able to handle it, but it's still all very new. And let's talk, game 20, we'll see how things are going in that regard. But you're absolutely right. I think it's a case of players. It was a little bit of a case of players getting used to a new system. Also, players getting reminded what regular season hockey can be. Granted, October 9th hockey, but still regular season hockey. And the test, as I said, is Friday night and then next week. If things are coming together, great. Don't forget last year, the Canucks won 8-1 opening night. Edmonton looked like a disaster. Edmonton looked like a disaster again, by the way, this Wednesday. Canucks go into Edmonton, absolutely steal a point, but also, Edmonton didn't help themselves, but the Canucks did everything they could to steal that game, and then were absolutely terrible on the first game of a road trip, or first game of back east, I should say, because they were in Edmonton. But that to me is the reminder. Look how great the year went last year, and people might forget the beginning of the year was really not very good.
Points in October is important as points in April, Patrick.
They do. They matter.
Another great hockey cliche. All right. In our ultimate professionalism here, when we do these videos, we're trying to match schedules between, I don't know, people having days off, power going out, service people showing up at your house, seeing as we're working from home now. So there's no preparation. This is not something we've scripted or talked out. I'm just going to throw a bunch of shit at you and see how you answer. Okay. Rank these players in terms of their importance to this Canucks season. Demko, Pettersson, Hughes, and Miller.
Ooh, that's a good list. I mean, they're nowhere without Quinn Hughes. So I think Quinn Hughes actually is first on this list. Because if you don't have Hughes having a strong season, where are you? Demko is almost certainly number 2. I mean, he should probably be number 1. He's probably distinctly most people's number 1. But I think you take Hughes away and they're lost. You take Demko away and there's a chance, as we saw last spring, but you still rather have him. So I think he's number 2. We're not sure on the timeline. I mean, when I was talking to people last month, there was a notion maybe the end of October. I haven't heard anything to make me change that. I don't think there's any particular rush here. It's an unusual, I'm not even sure injury is the word anymore. It's an unusual condition he's dealing with. So that's number 2. I mean, Elias Pettersson, obviously they need him to be the player he was in the first half of the season. And if he's not, first of all, it's a disaster from a contract standpoint. But second of all, they're going to be in games, but they're not going to dominate. They dominated last year because Pettersson was dominating. And number 4 was JT Miller. I have no concerns about JT Miller, so that's why I'm putting him at the bottom of the list. The guy's in the midst of the great seasons of his career, right? He is obviously in his 30s now, and so that will come to a crashing halt at some point. But right now, he's riding the wave. He knows exactly who he is. He's having success. He's being reinforced by his coach, by his teammates. The player he is, this is the player he's always wanted to be. He had a fascinating comment the other day before his 800th game on Wednesday, talking about, he sort of gave the cliched, soak it in, the advice to a player making their NHL debut. What do you do? Soak it in and try to enjoy, try to really pay attention to what's happening. Which is a bit of a cliched answer. And I went up to him after and I said, is the implication that you didn't do that? And he said, you make a plan, and the moment you get into it, it's all out the window. Because, he clearly had thought, you think your whole life about what would be my NHL debut be like, blah, 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 blah. And then you get in the actual action, the game's happening, and it's all of a sudden it's another game. And, he's a guy that really, I think, has become much more self-aware of what he's doing, where he's doing, and how he's doing. And I think that's to the Canucks' benefit. And you look at the production since he came to Vancouver, 11th overall in points in the NHL since 2019.
So there's your headline. Patrick Johnston says JT Miller irrelevant to Canucks success.
Okay. Totally relevant, but nothing.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. I look, they're all important. That's why it was a tough question. And of course it's framed around the fact that they didn't get the big save in the playoffs at the end of the day. They didn't get the big save in opening night. So that's how important Demko still is to this team. Yeah. Goal scoring. Who finishes with most goals for the Canucks? Besser, Miller, Pettersson, other?
Besser. I mean, sure, Miller and Pedersen have the potential, especially Pedersen, to be up there. But I think Pedersen, looking at who his line mates are, he's already looking. I mean, we saw this on Wednesday night. I think he's still trying to find his rhythm. Um, but he had moments. There were chances to shoot. He's looking to pass. I think he's just. This is what happens with all guys. They become passers, and obviously he still knows how to shoot, so he's going to shoot. But I think he's just his inclination is not quite the same. But I think, and Besser's just the best pure goal scorer. And look at the role they have him playing the power plays. Net front, he got 2 goals on Wednesday. He already looks like he's meshing well on the power play with Jake DeBrusk. He's doing all the right thing. He meshes so well with Miller, who's the best passer on the team. Miller can shoot, but he's he loves to set his buddy up, and I think Brock Besser's in for another big goal scoring season.
Other than Quinn Hughes, which defenseman will have the most impact, good or bad, on the Canucks season?
Ooh, good or bad is a good one. Well, I mean, I think people's instincts are probably Philip Hronek because they know what he's about. But, I mean, it's got to be a guy. Weirdly, it's reversed. It's the good or bad. It's the bad part. It could be Vinny Desharnais. Like, there's a lot of pressure on this guy. He struggled a lot at the end of last season. Like he didn't have a good finish the year in Edmonton. It's not just changing teams. It's a player who needs to sort of reset, revamp who he is. There's just a lot of pressure on him to be a really important player on this team. And we'll see how that pans out.
Yeah, I mean, that's the reason I framed the question that way, is if he's solid or maybe a little better than expected, then,
well, that's exactly it. Then
fortunes could be great.
Yeah. What were we worried about? And we were, the only, I mean, in the end, it's on him to prove us wrong. And yeah, here we are.
So at the end of the season, not regardless of fortunes, but framing whatever fortune beholds this team, Stanley Cup champions, finalists, don't make the playoffs, out first round, will we be talking more about the Canucks power play or their penalty kill, for good or for bad?
I think we'll be talking about the power play, because the power play, it was interesting when they talked last weekend. I mean, again, JT Miller and Rick talk. I mean, Miller mentioning, well, we need Jake DeBrusk, that kind of Horvat type player, or we need Bo Horvat metaphorically. And the point being, they haven't found the right fit in the bumper. But you go and look at the stats, and like they're scoring at the same rate that they did since Horvat left as before. So the system's all right. It's just that it's not a top 5 power play. And if this team really wants to be the cup contender that they believe they are, they need to get power play goals. It's a pretty simple equation. You look at how good the power plays. I mean, special teams overall for Stanley Cup contenders, but power plays especially, because it's about scoring goals and it's about breaking down the other team when they're vulnerable. And that to me is going to be the mess. We've seen such bad penalty killing. It's hard to imagine that happening again. It was all time bad. How bad it was under first Travis Green and then Bruce Boudreau, and Rick Tocchet and Adam Foote seem to have found a much better.
And specifically, it's so important in the match against the Oilers, right? I mean, that's ultimately what it comes down to.
Yeah, and in that really, if you look at the story, they slowed the Oilers down enough, and they almost beat them, right? Yeah. Like the Oilers were not clear, didn't skate away from the Canucks in that series last spring.
Yeah. Okay, last one of these theoreticals. Do you see this team largely being what it is now, that it will be at the trade deadline, or do you foresee that there is potential for a fairly sizable move?
Well, they're leaving the Pullman trade, which obviously I've been pointing out to everybody who could matter. This was a thing they needed to do. They did it, and credit to Patrick Allvin for that. I said it was a hell of a trade. Picked up a mildly interesting semi-veteran, still reasonably young defenseman in Eric Brandstrom. I have no expectations on him, but getting rid of the Pullman contract's everything. And the fact that they are now have like $2 million of cap space. Like they're going to have a bunch of cap space at the deadline. Now we know that in general, Jim Rutherford has always, I mean, he's always operated in the sense you got to get ahead of the market. He certainly has told Patrick Allvin you got to get ahead of the market. The ability to make moves that this front office has shown stands out, and they've created space for them to do something. They're absolutely going to trade. I mean, I assume they're going to trade for a defenseman. They need another guy who can raise the game. I've already mentioned it. That third pairing, you look at it and you're like, God, you're just trying to survive that at this point. You hope that it doesn't come home and hurts them so much that talking about adding a defenseman later in the season fundamentally won't matter. But that's I think what they've set themselves up to do. I think it's very clear they would like to add a defenseman at some point in this season.
So on that, when I look at, it's so funny, like you go through all the preseason, like training camp, preseason, all the speculation,
right?
And then it really comes down to, Ratu or Baines, who's going to be on the final roster, and then Baines is back up like after. So like we know what this is hockey. You don't see the sort of like end of training camp cuts that you do in other sports per se, but there's been an okay amount, not a ton, of sort of looking at the Canucks prospects, and they have given up a lot of high picks. Yes. And then you look at things like, great, they signed Höglander. He was the second round pick, but the first round pick, Podkolzin, is gone. Note that they didn't have a pick in the first 3 rounds last year. This team doesn't. Where did they sit in terms of prospects? Because it's not like you talk about, when you talk about, they're probably going to add a defenseman. It's not necessarily like we're going to leave this guy in the minors for the first half of the season and hope he can contribute if we call him up in the second half. Right. Are you concerned at all about the lack of, and I'm not even really talking about this year, like 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, losing all these top picks? Or is that something that you like the core where they are and you can always recoup prospects via other means?
Well, there's a line that scouts like to say that all prospects are bad prospects, but some might make it. You'd rather have first and second round picks. Like those guys actually make it, and those guys become impact players. And you just mentioned one, which is Niels Höglander, which, I was talking to Rick talking about him yesterday, and he just absolutely gushed. He is so impressed with what that guy's done and how he's improved his game. And you can just see how much more confident Höglander is. He's found his way. He understands what they're doing. It's a system that works for him. He had great results last year by playing, as they quote unquote, playing the right way, right? He gets the net. He's got these fantastic hands, and he's got a great finisher. That's why you want a second round pick. Like you find interest, guys that are great, but also slightly flawed, and they need some work. Well, he wasn't, he needed to work on his all around game, and he ended up being the perfect example of a guy who can do that. You obviously, no matter where you pick in the first round, you want first round picks. The Canucks have a couple interesting prospects in Jonathan Lekkerimäki and Tom Flander, both first round picks. No, not high first round picks, but both first round picks. Like there's talent there. That's the cheapest way to build out your team. You still need obviously to sign players. You need to find other players. You'd have to build a roster in all kinds of different ways. There's no one way to do it. But the other thing, and we've talked so much about the third pairing, but the Canucks have no internal options to play on that third pairing, and that's because they drafted so poorly. Jim Benning never found any other defenseman really. They got Quinn Hughes in the first round, but like there are no other Jim Benning defensemen on this roster right now. Guillaume Brisebois is in the system, but he's not a guy that's going to go anywhere. Nikita Trampkin came and went. Gustav Forsling was traded right away. The Canucks, since I know I've said this in a few places now, but since drafting Alex Edler in 2004, and it's Alex Edler's big one-day contract Friday night, but since drafting Alex Edler in 2004, the Canucks have drafted 4 defensemen who basically have become NHL regulars or have had a consistent NHL career. Kevin Connaughton, who never played for the Canucks. Ben Hutton, who played a bunch for the Canucks, is now with Vegas. He's at 500 games, actually. Quinn Hughes.
Wow.
And Gustav Forsling. And it like that is why you need high draft picks, because the later you go in the draft, and more this is becoming true, and I wrote about this in the summer, that finding, just regular NHLers, not stars, just guys that feel you need guys that can just play on your team, play every night. Less and less that's become rarer and rarer to find those guys after the third round. And it's just a reality, and so it would behoove the Canucks to hang on to their first and second round picks because they've drafted with both of those picks so rarely in the last decade, especially. Yeah. You can see where they're at right now. Like they're having to constantly patch over that third pairing, and if you want to find young cheap guys that you have built into your system. They really are hopeful with Tom Willander. Like, I think he's going to be here. The hope is he'll be here by next season. He's not going to be a savior, I don't think, but he's a guy that should play and should make your defense score better. And they've got a couple guys out in Abbotsford, I think, that are, Kirill Kudryavtsev and Elias Pettersson.
Repeating.
Yeah, they're both, guys that are going to be options possibly as soon as this season. And that's important. Like, finding those guys are important. Sawyer Minio, the Canucks are really high on. Scouts I talked to are less high on him, but like that's a guy that's on the list as well. That he's a left shot defenseman, does a lot of good things well. Can he make himself 5% better and become an NHLer?
Great stuff, Patrick. We're not going to do the what do you think this week because I think that
it's too soon.
Florida games are a little up in the air too.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
and they've got the weekend off after the game against the Flyers. So great stuff, everyone. You can, as I said, Canuck Report, province.com, vancouversun.com. Send in your questions to Patrick in whatever form you can find them. Leave them under our story here, especially on YouTube. We get a lot of good questions there. He does a weekly mailbag. Thanks, everyone. We will talk to you next week. All right.